What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. We made it. One game left in the season, and let's be honest, two best teams are left at this point. There are a few other teams that I would have been perfectly fine with making it this far, but at least in my opinion, Chiefs, Eagles, two best teams in the league this season, so pretty awesome we get a chance to see this matchup. Also, a lot of blowouts this year, a lot of blowouts even in the playoffs, but the line for this game opened with KC as slight favorites, very quickly bet to the Eagles side, and I think for the last 4 to 5 days, it has not moved. 1.5 points in favor of the Eagles. We'll see if there's any sort of adjustment on Sunday right before the game, but it seems like this should be a very, very close game, a very, very good game. So pretty excited for that one this week, and being the last game of the season, you know we need some action on it this week. So I'll be going over my favorite underdog picks with you all in today's video. And I'll also talk about some ways we can be smart about just putting together the best parlays this week just to maximize our upside if different things hit. So sit back, hit the like button, and let's hop into things. First off the bat, I want to quickly go over two lines that are no longer up. One, because I want to give my thoughts on those players, and then two, because the lines are still very close to that point, and if they ever go back, I want you guys to be able to see that and take them. So the first one is Juju over 3 receptions, and the second is Juju McKinnon under 3.5 receptions. Juju's now up to 3.5, McKinnon is now down to 3, but if they ever get back to those points, I really like them. Juju, obviously, we've talked about probably the past few months. Eagles, most susceptible to slot wide receivers. Very, very good against outside wide receivers. Very, very bad against the slot. This is good news for Kelsey because Kelsey plays in the slot plenty. But good for Kelsey, good for Juju, good for at times Toney. We'll talk about in a second because it's not 100% of their plays are from the same formation and they're going to rotate wide receivers. It's just that Juju spends the most time in the slot and he'll be out there more than Toney. So I really like him in this matchup. And I know he's had just a terrible year in regards to what we thought he could have done, but 18 games played this season. He's gone over this 8 times. He's pushed, so gotten exactly 5 times and under 5 times. So there's still been 13 of 18 games where he has not hit the under, which would obviously lose you the bet. Also, I know he left last week's game with the injury. Him and Toney did. And Hardman's not going to be playing this week. He's definitely out. We know Juju's playing. We know Toney's playing, so they're going to be back this week. We don't 100% know. They're not going to tell us their full health status, but it seems like given the 2 weeks and given the reports that we've had from both players this last 2 weeks ago, I guess. So the first week after the game, they didn't really practice. That's a week where you just try and get everyone healthy, everyone rested. This week, they've been practicing. Again, seems like they're going to be a full go in this game. That's what I'm assuming. But yeah, given the matchup, given that if you can get this at 3, because 3 is such a good push for this one, I really like it. 3.5, not as in love with it for Juju. And so if you want to still take advantage of this matchup, I've taken the over on 37.5 receiving yards instead. And I like that more than over at 3.5. I know you're like, well, Nick, for him to hit, he still needed 4. Just because you take the push away at 3, I just don't like it as much. The odds that if Juju can get to 4 receptions and hit the over on 3.5, the overwhelmingly likely outcome was that he hit the yards anyways. And since if you take the yards, he could still get lucky and hit for a 15 or a 20-yard play and maybe hit the over on 3. I just think 37.5 is more likely to hit the over than him getting to 4. I hope that makes sense. Just kind of thinking about if he gets the 3 receptions, I think he can still get to 38, 39 receiving yards, whereas if he gets to 4, he's probably going to get there anyway, so why not just take the yards? So again, the lean is the yards and not 3.5, but if we see 3, take that. Then for McKinnon, it's just I don't know. I was surprised. It was definitely narrative was pushing why people thought McKinnon would be good in the playoffs, but everything seemed to indicate that he was a huge part of the offense. When they would get up, they wouldn't use him as much, but in high leverage situations, when they wanted to throw it, they would use him. But that has not happened in the playoffs. I mean, his target share is way down. They're using Pacheco a lot. I believe Clyde's going to play this week, but I mean, let's be honest, he's probably not going to play much even if he does get any snaps. He might only see like 2 touches. But just his involvement is a guess of potential that could happen kind of thrown in there. But under 3.5, I mean, he's been under that in 4 of the last 5 weeks. He ran fewer routes than Pacheco last week. And if you think about the last week's game, when, again, you've got Juju, Toney, Hardman, all being injured, this would be a spot where you're like, if you knew that going into the game, you'd think that McKinnon, and in a close game where like they had to, it wasn't like they won by like 50 and they could just run a ton. I mean, they barely won that game. You would think that McKinnon would have racked up 6-7 receptions because they'd be using him a ton, maybe lining him up a wide receiver. That just didn't happen. Again, Pacheco ran more routes than McKinnon last week. So at 3.5, really like the under there. Because it's back to 3, I don't like it as much. But if you want to still take advantage of that, I'll talk about at the end of the video. You can just take the yardage under as well. That correlates just as well. If he's not playing as much, not getting as many receptions, well, the yards also won't be there. So those are the 2 that aren't up right now, but very well could be when you're watching this. They could still change. How about some lines that are definitely available right now? One thing I really like to do is looking at discrepancies between sites and then also ones that match my projections. Because if there's a change between sites, but my projections are like, they're both kind of meh, we don't really care about it. But like when I see one that's a really good pick on one site, and then you go on over to Underdog, and not only is it still a really good pick, but it's an even better value. I usually look at DK because they just see, a lot of the money coming in. Like that's one you want to attack. When you think it's a good pick on DK, and then it's even better on Underdog, you want to attack that. And Kadarius Toney is the one this week that's really fitting in on that. My projections have him at 37.5 receiving yards in this game. So nothing crazy, right? 37.5. That's not anything crazy. DK has him at 26.5. They're over under with juice on the overs. I think it's like minus 125 when I last looked. So basically saying like that's the favorite to happen is over. Underdog, only 22.5. And I know that's not a crazy difference, but you almost never see a 4-yard difference for receiving, maybe for like passing because the totals get pretty high, but for receiving, that's a really big difference. And having him, projected 15 yards over this, like he could hit this on 2 receptions. And we know for a fact he's going to get designed plays to him. He's not going to be on the field a ton, and that's going to be a concern when you're watching the game. You're going to be like, where is Kadarius Toney? He doesn't play that much. But when he's out there, his target share is massive because they put him out there when they're like, okay, let's get Toney the screen pass. Let's get this play designed to get him the ball quickly and see what he can do after the catch. And so because we just know those are coming, we know that he's got some sort of floor for these receptions and yards, but also matchup matters less. We're not, needing Toney to go out there and just shred the Eagles' outside cornerbacks, which is not going to happen. He's a good receiver, but he's just not going to do that. And so because that's kind of what you're asking someone like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, like you're asking him to do that if you want his over, he needs to just win. With Toney, it's like, well, how much do the outside corners matter on screen passes? It obviously does matter, but matchup matters far less if they're just designing him the ball very, very quickly. And so with a very low over-under, with people hesitant to take it because of the injury, even though the reports are he's still looking good this week, it's just a really, really good one to take. He's going to get, I would say 2 to 3 is like a lock. Now, the unfortunate part is maybe one of those comes on like an end around and we don't get those yards. So if you wanted to take like total yards, that would totally be fine as well. I prefer receiving. I just think that one is a little bit more likely. So definitely take advantage when you get situations like this. Again, it's the best line on Underdog, getting 4 yards less than DK. And if you haven't signed up yet for an Underdog account, maybe you were looking to bet these on DK and you're like, well, yeah, I definitely would prefer 22.5 over 26.5. It's your lucky day. We've got promo code FFA, match your first deposit up to $100. That means you can walk into this weekend with a free $100 if you take full advantage of this promo. That's a really, really big hedge to have, them just doubling whatever you put in this week. But on top of that, we've got a really, really nice promo this week. They're doing a free square. So starting on Thursday, that's today for me, that's yesterday for you guys, this prop is up there. We got a free square on Jalen Hurts over 0.5 total yards. So as long as Jalen Hurts has at least one passing or rushing yard, which he's incredibly likely to do, you're going to hit on this prop as long as obviously you take the over. You're taking the over on 0.5 total yards. So that is an insane special. Definitely take advantage of that. And this special also is for anyone. So if you're an existing user, you can't take advantage of using promo code FFA, then matching your deposit, you can still take this. It's a free win. Take free wins whenever you can get them. So now that we're all deposited, we all have our free square. We all have our Toney, Juju, McKinnon props. What else do we like? I again like the over on Miles Sanders rushing prop. It's at 60.5 this week. I don't think it's going to fluctuate very much. It should finish around 59.5 to 61.5. I'm cool with all of them. I think all of them are fine to take the over. So if it moves a little bit, that's fine. If it goes up to like 65, 66, maybe hesitate. But in general, it's going to be around 60. I don't think it's going to change that much from there. And I know he's been frustrating at times this season because you watch the first half of these games and you're like, oh, he's crushing. Like he's easily going to hit this over. He's going to have like 80, 90 rushing yards this game. And then you look at the score at halftime and they're up by 25 and you're like, oh, come on. Like another game where he's going to have one touch in the second half. They're just going to ride Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell every play because the game's over, right? Why use Miles Sanders? Keep him healthy. And you'd think in the playoffs that wouldn't happen. But in their last two playoff games, they have the bye, then they blow out the Giants, and then they blow out the 49ers. It's just been blowouts. And so we haven't seen it happen. It feels like, I'm a broken record here every week talking about it. But if they can get into a competitive game, Miles Sanders is the guy. He's going to get all of the carries, not all of the carries, but he's going to get plenty of carries. He's going to hit this over far more often than he doesn't. They just can't have a blowout at halftime, which, I mean, if they blow out Kansas City at halftime, it means that Mahomes and Kelsey both got injured very early in the game. Like, it's going to be a close game. And even if it's not like, a 3-point game, Kansas City is not out of it until they're down by 60. Like, there is no chance that they come out of halftime like, well, we're up, 17. Let's start using Gainwell and Boston Scott ahead of Miles Sanders now. They're going to lean on him. There's no game next week. It's all the offseason. They don't need to worry about keeping players fresh and healthy. Sanders is going to get the ball a lot. Now, some people argue you could use the over on his 13.5 rush attempts, and I think that's totally fine to use as well. But if you look at his box scores, he's got 10 games this season where he went over 13.5 carries, and he hit the over on his rushing yards in 8 of those 10 games. So, 80% of the time, if he goes over, he's hitting the rushing yards anyways. And it's the same thing that we kind of talked about with Juju. It's like he could still hit the rushing yards over if he doesn't get there on attempts. If he gets to like 12, 13 attempts, he just gets under. I think he can go over on the rushing yards. We know that this is a big advantage game for the offensive line of the Eagles over the defensive line of KC. KC still has a perfectly fine defensive line, but like the Eagles are a mismatch with any team they're going up against. They have the best offensive line in the league. They're going to find success on the ground. And so just to kind of take away from that potential negative, maybe he does get to 13 and you're like, oh, he just missed, but he's at, 65 rushing yards. Should have taken you over there. If we look at the 9 games where he had under 13.5 attempts, he did go over 60.5 3 times. So there still is a chance he hits that even on the under there. And so I like taking that. And that sort of brings us to the final section of this video. Let's be honest, there are millions. There are millions of people betting props this weekend. So the odds are, come Sunday, most of these lines are going to be very efficient. And at the very least, they're going to be much more efficient than they usually are during the season because more people are betting them, right? And so while we can find these small edges, all the props are listed today so far, they have an EV around like 10 to 20%, which is, makes them really good picks. Besides, obviously, the Jalen Hurts free square, that's, like infinity EV, it's going to hit. But all these other props, 10 to 20%. And so they're profitable over time, but on like a 1-game sample, obviously anything could happen. So I would say the best advice is, instead of worrying about exactly which prompts to take, just make sure your slip tells a story. We went over Miles Sanders. I really do like the Miles Sanders prop over 60.5 rushing yards. Well, for that to hit, we would very much prefer Kansas City does not jump out to a big lead. Because if Kansas City gets up 17-3, what does that mean the Eagles are going to do? The Eagles are going to throw the ball at a higher rate. Maybe they're using Kenneth Gainwell more, because Kenneth Gainwell is a receiving back. They don't really throw to Miles Sanders at all. And so Sanders will get less opportunity, less chance of hitting. Under that game script, why would we want to take the Sanders prop and then also take props that indicate that Kansas City is coming out to this big lead? If we're saying, I think Philly opens up with this league, go with that game script. We want the Eagles to be in a close game or to be leading. And so all of the other picks in the slip should be assuming that that game script is going to happen. So one example slip could be, take the free square, Jalen Hurts over 0.5 total yards. That's one. And then 2 is obviously the Miles Sanders over 16.5 rushing yards. Then say, okay, again, I think the Eagles get up in this game. Let's take the under on Gainwell, right? If Sanders is going off, being used a lot, well, that means that Gainwell isn't. They're not in this trailing script that would get Gainwell receptions. And so take Kenneth Gainwell under 37.5 total yards. Then you can say, okay, well, what happens on the KC side? Well, they're probably trailing in the game. It doesn't necessarily mean that Mahomes is going to throw for 1 billion yards, but it means that they're going to lean more pass heavy. And so maybe we take some of these wide receivers that are what we think in good spots, take the over on Toney, and take the over on Juju. There's a 20-1 bet that all correlates together under a very specific game script. That's the process I think you should kind of have with these picks. I'm not saying that Gainwell is going to have a bad game, and so we should just take his under on every slip. It's more, if you think Sanders is hitting, well, it probably means that Gainwell is not hitting. And also, don't just think about one outcome. Don't just be like, well, I think that the Eagles win by 3. Here's my slip, all my money on that, and let's hope that that hits and I win everything, right? Instead of doing, everything on one, make multiple slips, multiple parlays under different outcomes. Let's be honest, like, many people have no idea what's going to happen this weekend. We think the game's going to be close. I think the Eagles win a very close game, but I wouldn't say I'm overly confident in that. I think it's definitely possible that KC is the team that gets up and they're in the positive game script, come the fourth quarter. So why not make, one slip where the Eagles get up, they're winning late, and then another one where KC gets up, they're winning late, if we really don't know which one is going to happen. So in my opinion, that would look something like this. KC is up late, and then Mahomes, he's still going to be in charge of the offense. He's still going to be used plenty, but they'll lean more run heavy than they would under different game scripts. And so it'd be more a Pacheco game than a McKinnon game. So take the over on 64.5 total yards for Pacheco, under on either. If you can get the 3.5 receptions, take the under on that. If not, you can take the under on his 45.5 total yards as well. Both those would work. Just saying Pacheco's used late, not McKinnon. And, the yardage will still correlate there with less usage. Then you look on the Eagles side, and you're like, okay, well, if they're down, they're probably not running it as much. So now we're not going to use the Miles Sanders prop. We're going to say Devonta Smith over 5 receptions, Dallas Goedert over 48.5 receiving yards as well. I love the spot for both of them, especially Goedert is in a really, really good spot. And then, if the volume is elevated, Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown are such key components to the offense. And I just think the Smith one just comes out a little bit better when you're doing the calculations. Him at 5 receptions over on that. Pretty unlikely in a trailing game script that he's at 4 or less unless the Eagles really fall apart. And so if we're already betting that they're down, they're trailing late, why not take 2 picks that would be, really benefiting from that sort of game script? Then, you could really do what you want with the free square, to be honest. You can either use that, make it a 20-1. You could leave it at 4. Remember, if you have 4 picks in the parlay for Underdog, use insurance. That's how the math works out. The only time you're using insurance is if you have 4 picks. Don't use it at 3. Don't use it at 5. But, do whatever you want. Either use the free slip to get this one to 20-1, use insurance on 4, or let's be honest, we're correlating this, right? If we're taking the over on Devonta Smith at 5 receptions, we're taking the over on Dallas Goedert's receiving yards, it probably means that Jalen Hurts is throwing the ball a lot. Maybe you just want to take the over on his 239.5 passing yards. Because again, this is assuming like that line is an average of all outcomes. If you knew they were going to be trailing, that line would be higher. And so if we're assuming that they're trailing, take the over on the line that would be higher if we knew that was going to happen. So that's how I would play this weekend. Again, don't go all in on one slip. Think about different ways that this game could play out and create smaller parlays for each individual outcome. Again, all my picks are free on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. You can see those ordered and which ones I like from most to least. And please remember about this week's promo. It is not often that a site gives you a free over-under of 0.5 total yards for a quarterback. Definitely take advantage of that. And again, if you don't have an Underdog account yet, and sign up using promo code FFA, they will match your first deposit up to $100, giving you plenty to play around with this weekend. So good luck to everyone. That, my friends, is in this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.